I mean, I was just as shocked as anyone to realize that just because you stop drinking and using drugs, that's not like I had the expectation that things would just get instantly better. Like I had no clue that I was as dysfunctional as I was. I had no real awareness of how atrophied my social skills were. And I
Right.
had no because I was constantly numbing myself, I had no clue of how deeply frightened I was of the
Mm.
world.
Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Stacking Days podcast. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. And again, really excited about the conversation that we're about to get into today. The guest that we have is actually someone that I've had a fortune of spending some really quality time with on what I've already mentioned is the sober sojourn that I took part of in November, where we spent 10 days in Kenya, traveling, seeing the country, safari, Nairobi, some historical locations, and Tammi, who's joining us today, was one of the participants on that trip. So we got to know each other a little bit on that trip, and I kind of like twisted her arm somewhat to actually come on the show and share her story. She's a woman who's in long-term recovery, and I think that she's got a real wealth of information and knowledge that she'll be able to share with us in the community. So without further ado, Tammi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ray. I appreciate it.
You got it. Well, let's get right into it the way that we always do on the show. Take us back to the early days of your relationship with alcohol. I know that we got to reach a little far back. Tammi, as I mentioned, is in long-term recovery. She's got 27 years under her belt, which is phenomenal. Congratulations. So let's go back to the beginning, if you can, and just give us a sense of where it all started and how you came to finding recovery in your sobriety, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, back in the beginning, was about mid 90s. I was a single mother with three children. They were 8. My oldest was 8. My next child was 5, and I had just had a baby, who was a girl. So I had 2 boys and a girl, and I was dying inside. I was one of those functional alcoholic and addicts where if you drank and used with me, then you knew that side of me, but if you didn't, you were utterly shocked. So there
Right.
was like this duality that was slowly like deteriorating and destroying me from the inside. I was completely overwhelmed with the young children that I was raising. I couldn't. I was a real mess. Like my older son did a lot of the he picked up a lot of the slack for his brother and sister. And I just got to the point where and the funny thing was I didn't know that alcohol and drugs were my problem. I really didn't. I suspected that I might be bipolar. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I ended up, first of all, I was unhappy with my parenting. So I like got help with parenting classes, and that kind of took the edge off of things. But
Mm.
I was still just dying inside. And I had been seeing therapists on and off. And I think I was finally honest with the last therapist that I saw, because at the very end of the session, and looking back, I realized that it must have been sort of more of an intake than a therapy session, because she said, we're going to refer you to our Center for Drug and Alcohol, because your drug and alcohol use could be contributing to your depression. So I just thought I was depressed, and wanting to die, and very dysfunctional in ways that nobody could see. And so that was the beginning of like the huge aha, like, oh my God, because my ideas of an alcoholic were, I had a father who drank beer like it was water and started early in the morning with like a huge stein. And so that was my definition of an alcoholic, or somebody in a brown paper bag living off the streets.
Yeah.
So I didn't think that that was me, or that that was my problem. And so finding that out was really a sense of relief. And it was like, oh my God, okay, now I know what's wrong with me. Now I know what's wrong with me. So I with that being in that center for drug and alcohol within, I think it was Kaiser Permanente, that section,
Mm-hmm.
the requirement was that we had to go to 12-step meetings. And the funny thing is, besides being terrified to go to a 12-step meeting, I started to remember that one of the times that I sought help with my parenting, one of the therapists has suggested that I go to 12-step meetings, and it totally went over my head. Like, I never even paid attention to the paper that she gave me or anything.
Mm.
So things were starting to kind of come together. And so that was sort of the beginning of, okay, I know what's wrong with me. I know why I keep wanting to die inside. I understand why I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And um, yeah, so that was the very beginning, the 12-step meetings.
Mm.
Yeah.
Man, Tammi, thanks for sharing that. I can only imagine. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine the pressure that you felt as a single mother of an 8-year-old, 5-year-old, and a baby. The question that I have is, it sounds. I mean, as I know it, alcoholism is progressive, right? So,
Mhm.
am I correct in assuming that you had been drinking, up until that point, and it had, kind of the wheel started to come off as you were mothering, as you were parenting, so I'm curious what those years looked like leading up until the point where it kind of just started to break for you.
Well, here's the thing. I didn't have any like outward wreckage. I wasn't a blackout drinker.
Mm,
So I always knew I wasn't, and I also used drugs.
okay.
So it was drugs and it was alcohol. And so I didn't have, and that's another thing why it became a surprise to me that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, because my kids weren't taken away from me.
Yeah.
Um, I was leaving my kids anywhere, and even like the verbal and physical abuse that I was giving to my children was definitely abhorrent, and I needed help, but I wasn't putting them in the hospital. So that was the thing that kind of kept me going for so long, not knowing that this was your thing.
Hmm.
This is why you are this way. So the destruction was inside, was literally inside. Like, I was suicidal. I didn't bring
Yeah.
that particular part up, but that was what really drove me to start to seek help, is because I wanted, not just felt like I wanted to die inside. I wanted to kill myself. Like, because I was dying and drowning inside, and it didn't look like it from the outside, and I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why I was so depressed and then I would be so happy and up and down. I didn't understand why the only emotions that I seemed to have were deep rage when I was angry, a super hard, deep depression and wanting to die, or super happy.
Yeah.
There was no in between. And I found out later that people in my life were afraid of me. They were afraid of,
The
like when I would
extremes.
rage and get upset. They were afraid of me. And they, yeah. So that was another thing. Like, okay, I didn't crash cars. I didn't lose my kids. There wasn't, the wreckage was more just continually deteriorating and crumbling inside. I can't even describe that feeling anymore because I'm so far from it.
Yeah.
But I remember that that's what was like. I was desperate inside.
Yeah.
And you couldn't see it from the outside, because many people in my life, when I started to tell them, that, and because it was an anonymous program, luckily I wasn't going around telling people, but there were a few people, like in my family and close friends, that were like, what, why you're not, and so there was
Right.
that whole push pull mind fuck thing.
Yeah, you're like, what the hell
um
is actually real here? And what can I hold on to as being my reality? Yeah, that's got to be pretty confusing. I
yeah.
I guess the question that I have then, and I know we're kind of going way back here, but as you embark on this program within AA and the 12 steps, what's kind of going through your mind that I guess in a way validates that this is where you need to be? Did you see early signs that it was working for you and helping you kind of get some clarity around a lot of these really confusing points of tension within you. What did that look like? Because I mean, I'm going to assume I've only stepped in the rooms once in my life, and I didn't go back, and I had to find my way to recovery in an alternate channel. But I'm assuming 27 years ago, it looked a little different than it does today. Like,
Oh,
what did that look like for you, and how did you grasp onto that and hold on to it?
so the thing about why I was so comfortable with AA back then, is because my mom, when I grew up, she lived in like suburbs, and I went to school with like predominantly white people. So, like coming into the rooms of AA, I was just very comfortable. And so what I was listening to the stories of the people, and my very first AA meeting was a women's meeting. And so I heard incomprehensible demoralization. I heard that I can't drink and use drugs like other people. I heard about the wreckage and the deep insecurity, and like I heard my story. And so for me, I did notice, I was really literally the only one in the room, the only Black woman in the room, but I was so far gone that it was about looking for connection and community.
Right.
And so when I first went to that very first AA meeting, I was sitting in a circle. It was a women's meeting, and I was feeling very much like I was all in my head. I was fucked up because I was an alcoholic and an addict. I was in this place that I had to be as a condition of my treatment, terrified, not knowing what was going to happen. And these women were coming in, and they all knew each other. It was right before the 4th of July. And I'm in
Mm.
Southern California. So a couple of them had been to the beach, and they were hugging and laughing and talking. And I was literally just kind of holding back tears, sitting with my hands looking down. And then this woman walked into the room, and she saw me, and she walked over to me. She said, "Hi, my name is Ellie." And she bent over and she hugged me. And
Mm.
that hug made me instantly feel a part of things. And then somebody else came around and held out like a laminated piece of thing and said, "Hey, can you read this?" And I was like, "Okay, I can read." I not knowing, yeah, I can read. And so then the meeting started, and even their readings started to tell my story. Like I had never sat anywhere where it was telling my thoughts and how it was just one of the most emotional experiences of my life. Reading, like I knew that I was in the right place because their literature was telling me so. And
Mm.
when I started to read, the part of the reading, it was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. The reading was, "Why are we here?" And I started reading it, Ray, and I broke down in the middle of it because I was literally reading why I was here and I couldn't finish. And I was mortified because I was crying in public with these people that I didn't know. And crying was always frowned upon, and I was always shut down and just really treated crappy for crying. I'm an emotional person. I have big emotions. I'm sensitive. And so I literally sat there crying, terrified, waiting for someone to snatch the reading out of my hand or something, and nobody snatched the reading out of my hand. There was just
Mm.
this empathetic quiet. The woman next to me literally reached out and started rubbing the small of my back. And I just was like, okay, I got myself under control. There, there was a little baby on a rug, not a rug, a blanket in the middle of the circle of chairs. She had been like maybe 6 or 7 months, and the baby farted in the middle of all that. And we all laughed. We
A
had
little
this like,
comedic relief.
right. And then I got myself under control, and I finished reading why I was there. And then they did tokens where people were taking time tokens. And there was a woman, her name is Christine. I'll never forget. She was taking a 4-year token, and she dedicated her token to me, which was like,
Mm.
she's like, "I want to dedicate this to this newcomer, Tammi. I see your pain. I welcome you. You belong here." And so that was my experience with 12 step, and um, why I knew that it was the place for me. So the literature, it was a step study meeting, and so every other week was open share. And then the weeks that it wasn't, we read from the book. So I really started to learn about their literature, but how I survived my childhood and my life up to then was to figure out what you needed me to be, and
Mm-hmm.
I became that. So much of I spent 22, about 20, almost 22 years in the 12 step community. That first 4 to 5 years was really, I mean, it did save my life, and I was able to stay sober, and I was the only Black person in most of the meetings that I attended. But I also was very much becoming that the good little 12 step recovering alcoholic and addict.
Mm-hmm.
So there was very much the, I guess, chameleon is what I liken it to.
Mm-hmm.
And I had great 12 step mentors or sponsors, as they call it. So really, even though it was life saving, it absolutely saved my life. And I learned a lot about myself and alcoholism and drug addicts from the AA standpoint. And that's what I took in. Their principles and values are solid. They're many of what I have and carry within me to this day. But probably around 12 years sober. And so that's what I did is I was the good alcoholic and addict. I did service commitments. I went to meetings because they said I needed to. I got a sponsor. I worked the steps. It took me a while to get through the steps. And I think that that step work was where I think a lot of my resistance and where the the real me was probably trying to emerge as I was learning from the 12 step community.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to this really beautiful mountain town within San Diego County that is mostly Republican, mostly Hispanic, mostly white, a big Hispanic community, but a lot of them work for like the farms and different things, ranches around here.
Yep.
Um, and so this was like me sort of really staying with what I knew and what I was comfortable growing up in. Um, so that's how the 12 step community, that's how it embraced me. And that's how I um, learn to wake up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to stay sober based on their principles and values, which worked for a really long time until it really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was really a place of more of a spiritual relapse than actually going back to drinking. So for me, that looked like I was finally able to hold down a really good job. I was raising my kids. I was going to work, but then I was like losing myself in books or watching a lot of TV or movies,
Mm-hmm.
and going to meetings. So there was this life that wasn't. It was good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a life. I don't know if that makes any sense. It was a life that was good enough. I wasn't. I
But
didn't
you
feel like
knew that there was something else, I'm assuming, right? Waiting maybe on the other side of something for you.
I think I did, but I was afraid of it. So for a very long time, when probably from about 12 to like 18 years, was
Mm-hmm.
just that grind of being a single parent still. My kids were getting older, and going to the 9 to 5 grind. And then finally, once my kids, two of them were out of the house, and my daughter was like 18 and still in the house. Um, yeah, I think I started to wake up when there was this incident with my job where they were handing out the pension thing. They every couple of years, it's a brown envelope, and it always tells you what your pension is if you keep the salary, and it tells you what your retirement date was. And this was probably almost 10 years ago. I looked at it and it was telling me my retirement date was like 2032. And that was like, for me, that was the wake up call. Like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do this for another 18 fucking years. Are you kidding me? I don't,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was what really started to wake up. And so for me, that journey looked like my turning away from the 12 step program as I began to start to explore who I was, started with yoga.
Okay.
Um, I started going to yoga, and I started getting as great a feeling about myself and knowing myself and being more comfortable in my body than I ever did in a 12-step meeting. But I couldn't tell you that as it was happening. I just knew that the yoga classes were great, and I kind of stopped going to as many meetings.
Yeah.
And then I decided to become a yoga teacher, and I took yoga teacher training, and that will really and truly disrupt you spiritually in the best kind of way. And so there was just there was a yoga community, and there was a writers community that I started to do. I started going to writers workshops and going to, and all of the stories that I was mining from all of that were all about me and my life and learning who I was, and all of that. Like, I started to understand that as much as the 12-step program had helped me, it was still also limiting. There were things happening in the world, with Black men and women and children being shot and killed by the police, that I couldn't bring to the meetings. Like, and I
Right.
was really, it honestly felt a lot like when I first got sober, or before I got sober, how like I felt like I was going crazy because all this stuff was happening in the world to people who look like me. And yet, this 12-step meetings and the people that I had connections with, when I tried to talk to them about it, they were like, "Oh no, it's not really that bad. Oh no,
Mm.
oh, I that doesn't happen to me." And it was like I didn't have language for how all of that started to happen. And so that's what really led to me sort of separating and turning away from the 12-step community. And then um, the pandemic happened.
Mm.
The pandemic happened.
Let's pause right there, because there's just a whole lot to a whole lot to unpack there, Tammy.
Sure.
Firstly, I think that it's beautiful that you felt and experienced that degree of welcoming and that embrace initially in those early meetings. You hear a lot of people's experiences of that community and meetings, and I love the fact that that was your kind of inaugural experience. I think that a lot of times that can dictate how successful you're going to be in those early days, is just by how welcome do you feel in these spaces. So I mean, I literally choked up a little bit when you were recalling it. So I can only imagine
Emotion
that
comes up every time. Yeah.
yeah. Um, the other thing that really resonated with me is that you said you had become accustomed to becoming the person that others needed you to be, right? And and I've certainly felt this way. Even, I mean, I've been sober now for a couple of years, and even in trying to like reconcile and repair certain relationships in my life, I found myself saying, what do you need me to do? What do you need me to say to get me to make, and it's like, so I really want to like dive into your pool of knowledge. And how did you break free of that? I mean, I know that you have yoga. I know that you started writing. I've heard that writing is extremely therapeutic. Yoga, obviously, depending on how you do it, can be very spiritual and get you in touch with that aspect of yourself. But that is a deeply rooted set of shackles that I
Mhm.
find are very hard to remove oneself from. So, could you talk a little bit about what that growth trajectory looked like for you, for all of
Yes.
those who are struggling with that?
Yes. So, and thank you for like pulling that piece out, because I do want to talk about that trajectory, because it wasn't an overnight thing. And it was really a series of different people as I became awakening, as I started to awaken to the fact that, hey, I am kind of doing the same thing that I did before I got clean and sober. I'm kind of doing that in AA.
Hmm.
And I had an AA sponsor that when I came to her, like in tears, when I realized that I had this whole chameleon thing that I didn't know how to really be. Like, that's a weird thing to kind of wake up to 12 years in sobriety.
Yeah,
Um,
I bet.
and she immediately knew what I was talking about, very calmly just said to me, listen, I can help you. And what we're going to do is you don't have to figure out everything that you are all at once, but what we're going to do is we're going to figure out 5 things that you bring to the table, 5 things that are that you are going to be able to ground yourself in no matter where you are, what the situation is.
Mm.
And so that was really sort of the beginning of all of that. And they were like consideration, courage, integrity, humor, an open heart and mind. And they didn't come all at once, but she worked with me as we were going. She was one of the first sponsors that I had that, while she was doing 12-step work, acknowledged that I was coming to her with a very real issue of who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of a big piece of it. I was also seeing a therapist at the time. So I kick-ass therapist. I ended up seeing her for 8 years and started in 2013.
Mm.
And so she also was helping with that. And to me, her biggest contribution in all of our talks over the years was that she was the one that taught me about compassion, the importance of compassion and self-compassion. Every single time I would come to her with something to beat myself up about, and there were always lots because I always saw myself as the least or the fuck up. And every single time she would literally just very calmly tell me, matter of factly, I don't particularly see it that way. This is what I see. This is, be kind, be gentle. And it was a redirection that I almost like. First of all, I was a little frustrated with her about it for the longest time.
Mm.
And then I started to pick that up and I started to think of myself in that way. So being with someone, having a mentor, a sponsor who understood the particular issue with me feeling like I didn't know who I was anymore, even after 12 years of sobriety, and helping me to come up with some things that I knew about myself that I could ground myself in. I feel like that was like the real opening. The yoga thing happened by accident. Well, and then also understanding that I didn't have to be a mild mannered insurance adjuster for the next 18 years of my life. Like I had this great job where I didn't have to have a college education. It was helping me to support 3 children. I didn't have 3 children to support anymore. So there was a combination of things that I realized I didn't have to cling to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the therapist, Veronica, that particular sponsor, helping me with that. And then where the yoga came in, like, I had started hiking with friends here and there. And so that was a big piece of it. So it was really just little things that were coming together, the therapy, learning about self compassion. The yoga piece was the very first time I started to feel comfortable in my body. Like I remember very clearly, there were dresses and things in my closet that I swore that I wouldn't touch until I lost a certain amount of I lost a certain amount of weight, and I started wearing them and feeling good about myself and learning. And so that, more than anything, all of those combinations of things, being comfortable in my own body, the writing piece with the workshops. I actually wrote specifically with a certain group of women for probably a good 2 or 3 years, every 6 to 8 weeks, and just writing about my childhood and different things that affected me. Some of them were trauma, not a lot, but some,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to open those up and look at them with a therapist. Those things just helped me to settle more into who I was and helped me to decide and really have the courage to say, this life that I'm living right here, this is not enough anymore.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be. So one of the things that I'm starting to realize, like, so many people are impressed with my 27 years of sobriety, and it is an impressive number. I'm not knocking that, but sometimes I feel bad because I feel like it's almost a not misnomer, and it's not a fraud, but like so much of that time I sat somewhere where it was good enough and I stayed there for a long time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't all 27 years of continuous personal growth and healing. A lot of that has happened really within the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, and so I knew that I wanted to write. I knew that I wanted to teach yoga. And so those things, pursuing those things, I started writing with other people. I started getting trainings in different things that just really kept opening doors for me. That
Mm.
kept opening doors for me. And then I realized I ended up going to a pension meeting at my job, and I never did before, but I thought, let me just see what this is about. And I found out I could retire early after 15 years, and it would be a shorter pension, but I could get the fuck out.
Yeah.
And that was my mantra. Like, I'm retiring in 2022 when I'm turning 55. I'll have 15 years. And everybody thought I was crazy. Everybody. Again, the same thing with sobriety. Why would you want to do that?
Right.
And
But you're
so
retired now.
so I'm retired. It's going on a year and a half now. So I did it. And so all of that, as far as all of that led to me learning about myself, healing myself, being kind and compassionate with myself. Oh, this happened here, and this is probably a lot why I do this now.
Hmm.
Okay, can I do something different?
Yeah.
Those it's a trajectory, like you said. And so all of those things happen. The people that I met, the trainings and the things that I sought along the way have all helped me to just be like really kind of comfortable in who I am. And the Africa trip, that was a whole lot of me kind of test driving myself out into the world.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I mean, now having kind of gotten more familiar with your journey, it makes total sense. Like, just even thinking about like watching you move through spaces in Kenya, the way that you were, I mean, totally makes sense to me. I appreciate you making the distinction that, you know, look, not to diminish your 27 years by any means, right? But making the distinction that just because one becomes sober doesn't mean you got it all figured out, right?
Oh my God, yes. Thank you. Yes.
And even someone who has 27 years of sobriety behind them, they are still very much on this road of self discovery and learning, because we just have a lot of stuff that we got to figure out. Anyone, I think, generally speaking, has a lot to figure out in life, and as your life changes, you're constantly having to evolve to meet the needs and expectations of where you are, in your life at that time. And you're stepping into roles are stepping away from you. You have to continually redefine yourself, so who you are today may not necessarily be who you need to be for yourself in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So I think it's really important that you call that out, because I feel like, we're recording this conversation in January, and I feel a lot of people are looking at this thing through the lens of, oh, it's dry January, I'm going to clean myself up and snap my fingers, and it'll all be good. But there is that distinction between abstaining from alcohol for a period of time and truly stepping into a place of recovery so that you can gain that clarity, to get on a path to figure some things out. And you're going
Hmm.
to constantly be figuring those things out. So I appreciate you making that distinction.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was just as shocked as anyone to realize that just because you stop drinking and using drugs, that's not like, I had the expectation that things would just get instantly better. Like, I had no clue that I was as dysfunctional as I was. I had no real awareness of how atrophied my social skills were. And I
Right.
had no, because I was constantly numbing myself, I had no clue of how deeply frightened I was of the
Mm.
world.
Yeah.
Deeply frightened. And
Yeah.
that the fear is still there, but I I belong to some really great communities. I'm connected to some really beautiful people, and I myself am a pretty beautiful person myself inside.
Mm.
And I'm a good person to have in my corner. Now, it doesn't mean that this thing does not this thing tries to go to town on me too. Um,
Yeah.
but I have a lot more time and experience and record. I have a record now of, oh, you've been here before, Tammi. You don't have to stay here. We know this isn't really true, but it still happens. It still happens. And I love that you talked about that piece as far as, so now I'm at this stage in my life where I know who I am and what I'm grounded in, but there's also things that I want for myself. There's also things that I feel like my experience and what I'm going through and what I have gone through, I can speak to those and write about those and bring them out into the world. And maybe that will help people who also may be going through similar things. Like a lot of stuff that was happening for me, I didn't have language for,
Right.
until I started hearing other people saying, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm thinking. And so I feel like there's a real sense of service and responsibility in eventually the writing that I want to put out into the world. And we talked about that a little bit in Kenya. And so I'm still finding ways to be able to step into that on in ways that are true and align with who I am, that is heart centered. I don't want to go out and hustle for my worthiness because I don't need to.
Mm.
I don't want to be working. I didn't trade the 9 to 5 grind, capitalist grind, to be able to create a grind around this life.
Right.
So again, it's 27 years in sobriety. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. I'm still stepping forward in who I am and finding ways to stay in that, because the world isn't always doesn't always want to meet you where you are.
Yeah. When I hear you say that, what resonates and comes to the forefront of my mind is this concept around self-worth. And I feel like a lot of folks, particularly those who are in some sort of grind, whether it be a parenting grind, whether it be a professional grind, find and gain a lot of their self-worth through these roles that we play. And when those things aren't necessarily going too well, that talk gets in the way. So I love the fact that you've gotten to a place where it sounds as though you're very confident in where you find your self-worth, and it is not in some of these things that you've done in the past. I think that's a fantastic thing to hear. I love seeing that. So congratulations. That's like a Jedi move right there to get to that
Trying.
to get to that spot. With that being said, what are some of the obstacles, the hurdles that you come across today? Now that you're a little bit more matured in your journey, that you're still, kind of maybe even resorting back to the basics to kind of push through.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that, because yes, it's true. The obstacles, honestly, that I'm finding are the obstacles within me. It's even though I have this sense of myself and who I am that's brought me here, I'm stepping further beyond that. And so there is almost the same things that I'm dealing with comparison is the thief of joy. You like, I don't, stop comparing yourself to this person. That's not what you want to do anyway. Admire them. And then there's also, I haven't really mentioned like the piece as a Black woman, but there's so many spaces that are unsafe for women of color. I mean, you see it left and right now, especially women on the professional level, and that's not easy. That's not easy,
Yeah.
to navigate that. And I'm not even talking about how unsafe it is to be out in the world and, from the police or other systems. I'm talking about sort of the double-edged sword of people of color that get put into these high places in their career, but yet there's very little wiggle room. There's no support for them, and people are just waiting for them to fail. And how devastating that is for
Mm,
women of color.
mm,
So while that I don't perceive that as a particular obstacle, I see that, and it hurts my heart, and it makes me fearful to kind of step out into the arena,
yeah.
so to speak. But my boss is very fond of being honest with me and telling me, Tammy, you're already in the arena. And the truth of the matter is, I am. It's just a matter of, this new way of showing up in the arena.
I'm going to guess what the arena is, but can you tell folks what are you up to these days in addition to being retired? I know that you show up in a few spaces. What are
Yeah.
those
So
spaces?
right now, I facilitate sober support community meetings for the Luckiest Club, which is a
Cool.
sober support community founded by Laura McCowan, who is an author and a writer. And so I do that. I also co teach the online sober courses that they have developed within the TLC community. One is the Sober 90, which is like a 90-day program for people who are either new in sobriety or want to get a little bit more solidity within their sobriety if you have time, that teaches a lot of the basics. And they have come out with a sober life. So I'll be facilitating small groups. And then even for other communities, author Heather Plett, I took her Holding Space Foundations course back in 2020, and about halfway through the course, she had developed an online what she call it, an online retreat and an actual 12-week course, which she asked me to help co-teach,
Hmm.
because she knew I had experience writing and holding space because I'd been to one of her writing workshops. So really, all of the work that has been coming to me right before retirement and since retirement has been the heart-centered work that I want to do. What I want to do beyond that, for my own umbrella, I want to write. There is a Substack that I am working on doing, called The Unsettled Life, about that it's okay to sort of disrupt and unsettle your life to figure out who you are and do the things that you want to do. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your life is completely disrupted, but so I want to do that. And I do teach yoga, not in a studio anymore because the studio that I worked for closed during the pandemic, but I do it in retreats and things like that. So yeah.
Doing a lot,
Hmm.
but not a grind.
Not a grind.
Not a
I
grind.
mean, not a grind, which I love, love, love. Like the sober support meetings, I do 4 to 5 meetings a week, and
Okay.
they're an hour. So that's what that is. And then the courses, the sober 90 courses, are 90 days, and then there's like a month off in between. And I don't teach all of them. I did spring and summer last year. The sober life is going to be every other week. So what I love about the work that I do for the Luckiest Club or even for other organizations is it isn't a 9 to 5 grind, and it leaves me time and space to rest, to not
Mm,
be in a grind, to do my own training and healing, and to develop what I want to develop as far as the Substack and maybe even eventually some courses and things and mentorship.
I love that. I'm
Yeah.
looking out for the unsettled life, and I know that you know that. And for the audience who don't know, could you give us a sense where that name came from? I know it was a
Yes. So Nelson Mandela has this quote that just really, for me, I felt like resonated and really encapsulated my journey so far. And the quote is, "There is no passion to be found playing small in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living." And so that right there is just this is me. I'm living the unsettled life. Even now, 27 years sober, newly retired early, and I am continually unsettling my life and stepping out further
yeah.
on the path.
I think that's a great place to begin to wrap up. And I also think that, to be able to live an unsettled life from a place of ownership versus having an unsettled life where you're just kind of being whipped around in the wind willy-nilly are two different things. And you certainly have taken ownership of your life. So thank you so much for
Of
sharing your
course.
journey. Two questions as we head out. I usually ask this question. but being that do have so much time behind you, I think you could speak to people who are earlier in sobriety, maybe not someone who's sitting on the fence and just evaluating their relationship with alcohol, but for someone who is maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 years into their journey, and and still very much trying to develop and figure out what the hell this is all about. What advice would you give to that person?
Be careful of complacency. It's one of the things that I learned in the 12 step community, and I found this to be true, is we tend to lose a lot of people in that middle ground, that 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
It's a tricky time. It's a tricky spot in sobriety because you've sort of passed the stage where you're trying to quit. You've quit and you have made strides into hopefully a life that you want to be living. And it is so important that you either are connected with community or connected with some people who support your sobriety, that you are doing some sort of work around making sure that that's a surprise, that is a priority.
Yep.
It's so easy to sort of lose sight of that and to kind of slip into your daily rhythm of your life. And so it is really important that you understand how important your sobriety needs to be. Even at 27 years, it's my it's my main priority. It isn't anything that I necessarily lead with, but it is definitely foundational. I'm a sober woman.
Yeah.
I'm a sober woman.
That's really important to get across. Thanks for that. Second question I have is, and I usually scope this question out in a way where I ask if, in your darkest days leading up to your sobriety out of addiction, how would someone have known that you were struggling without you explicitly saying so? But the way that I'd like to kind of turn this question for you is, as you are kind of in those earlier years of sobriety, we still obviously are going to have struggles during those earlier years, but you're not drinking. So that tell is kind of off of the table, so to speak. So in your early days of sobriety, that 5, to 10 years, how would someone have known at that point that you were struggling without you explicitly telling them so?
That's a really hard question I think for me, and because I think so many people, and this speaks to how as children, we are taught how our parents we become what our parents want and need us to be. And so
Hmm.
we sort of give up parts of ourselves to belong, for safety, and to be loved. And
Yeah.
so we are so wrapped up in those masks and those roles,
Hmm.
um, that it is very hard for people to tell unless you have intimacy and people that know you well enough to look. Like there's a quote that says, um, a real friend can tell can tell that you're in trouble through your silence, or can read through your silence. So that there really has to be a sense of responsibility within myself to ask for help
Yeah.
and to open up and let people. Um, it's just such a tough thing because I was so caught up in being the good alcoholic and addict and the sponsee that my sponsor wanted me to be, and incorporating these principles and values, that they were teaching me and instilling in me. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and that my whole journey, what I realized, and I was just talking about that and writing about it in the most recent years, this whole journey has been home to myself.
Mm.
The healing, the learning about it, even the turning away from the 12 step community, who I will forever be grateful to them, but it only brought me so far. It only brought me so far.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best way that I can.
It
That's the
absolutely
answer I
answers the
have.
question. You know, these questions are structured in a way where there is no right answer, right? Like I think. So thank you for humoring me and getting into it. Lastly, where can people find you when they're looking for your facilitations, some of your other works, your communities, if they're open?
I don't have a website up yet. You can find me on Instagram at Queenie, QUEENIET_ all small letters, at QueenieT_. I have a Facebook page called Ever Inward. It's not hard to find.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
For now.
Well, Tammi, again, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we hang out. Maybe we'll be in Morocco next year. We'll see. We'll keep everyone posted on that. But again, thank you so much, Tammi. Really do appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
You got it. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.